Hello, we are BetterSea. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Here we break down the complexities of maritime decarbonization in a very simple way. So, depending if you are a shipping company, a terminal operator, or just general public curious about the topic, feel free to navigate to different playlists catered especially for you. Enjoy!
What shipping companies and where are affected by the new regulations?
Okay, so there are three different regulations coming into play or already in place, which is the CII, the EU ETS, and the FuelEU Maritime. All three of them target ships above 5,000 gross tonnage. The location is, however, different. So the IMO regulation, the CII, is relevant on a global scale. So for every ship that operates worldwide, whereas the EU ETS and the FuelEU EU regulations are eligible for those companies and ships that go in, out of, and within the EU waters.
Where do you think it's possible to draw the line of the perimeter of the EU waters?
So that is basically defined as every voyage that goes into the EU, out of the EU, or within EU ports. And then the emissions relevant to the regulations are 50% of the emissions on in and outgoing voyages and 100% of the emissions within the EU.
Before we talked about the recipe for transformation, if I am a shipping company, where do I start?
So you would start by understanding the data that you have in terms of what emissions you have within the scopes of the regulation and what the current compliance status of your vessels is. So for example, for CII, that applies a rating. You would check what is the rating for each of my single vessels. For EU ETS, that requires a cost exposure related to the EU allowances that you need to trade. You would check what is the cost exposure that we have. And then for FuelEU, where we have more a fleet level view, you would check what is the compliance balance for the fleet that I have.
I would also add here that oftentimes people are not even aware of their status. Maybe they don't measure, maybe they have or not have sensors. So I think the important part is to measure what you're doing in order to be able to act on it. So maybe if they're not measuring, maybe they can work with different technology suppliers or sensor suppliers in order to measure and get a hold of where they stand in all of this and not assume, but actually have the data to back it up. And then from there, see how they can comply. And I oftentimes see companies addressing one of these regulations at a time, ad hoc. And in that context, they actually end up paying more penalties than they should because the decisions that they make are the best maybe for that one-off regulation. But if one takes a bird-eye view on what is now active and what is upcoming in the very near future, then from there they can have, let's say, the best decisions for that longer period. It's almost like the most in, let's say, projects, we would say, okay, what is the most cost-effective solution to address it? So this is the similar approach towards regulation. So what is the most cost-effective way to comply within these and future? Tailor-made for me, for my operations, the routes that I'm serving, the type of vessels that I own, and maybe there is something simple that can be actually done that would make things change for them quite a lot in terms of whether they comply or not. So yeah, measure, and then based on that, make a data-driven decision from a little bit distanced view.
What is the percentage of shipping lines that can measure their emissions?
So basically, the regulations currently use the data that the shipping lines already report, which is the IMO DCS data and the EU MRV data. What Gordana mentioned is that they can improve their reporting by using sensor technology, etc. The reporting that they currently mostly do is based on so-called noon report data, which is basically data that the shipping crew inputs into some sort of dashboard or overview and sends it to shore. Here, of course, there are a lot of human errors involved and a lot of data cleaning, which can be reduced by using technology like sensors.
Let me do the devil's advocate. Let's assume I wait to look for others to start this journey first. What are the risks or the consequences for me?
Well, right now, I think we are in a very interesting time where we see large shipping companies placing orders for the new ships. And with that, they also have the power of influencing where and how the infrastructure is built. So they are taking their place in that future of green shipping. And of course, if one is reluctant to make a decision and is at this point just observing and doesn't act soon enough, then maybe in that future there will be no space for them and their operations in the context that is best suited for them. And by being proactive, now we still have, let's say, a rich landscape of opportunities of what and how can it be done, and enough time to prepare and adapt your business to it. And if not done so, then one may run out of business actually very soon, because the regulations are quite strict and quite aggressive in terms of the size of the penalties that people will have to pay, the companies will have to pay. So they will likely end up not complying, running out of business, or having to sell their business to someone who is larger with much better looking balance sheets that can have the resources to cover that transition fast enough, or has secured slots in the shipyards who are knowledgeable enough to implement these new fancy technologies. So that is the risk.
And how do these compliance measures work?
Basically, as we said, we have 3 different regulations. The ones that actually come with a financial impact is the EU ETS and the Fuel EU. The EU ETS requires you to buy a certificate for each ton of CO2 that you have emitted. The certificate price is highly volatile and ranges between currently about 60 euros to 90, 100 euros that we had previously for each ton of CO2. So that alone will amount to several millions in cost that you have on top of your fuel costs. And then you have the Fuel EU, which will come into place next year in 2025. And here you have a compliance penalty that you will face. So basically, if you on an annual basis don't achieve the requirements of the regulation, then you would need to pay a penalty for basically the delta, so the deficit that you have in terms of compliance. And that penalty is very expensive because it is built in such a way that using biofuels or other alternative fuels will have to be cheaper than actually paying the penalty, because it enforces the shipping companies to use alternative fuels.
And how the regulatory entities are going to measure that a shipping line stays within specific limits or that pays penalties?
So here again, the data comes into play that we have talked about before, which is the EU MRV data in the EU scope. And classification societies already verify this data. And this data is then shared with the regulatory bodies, and they basically assess the value of compliance.
As a shipping line, how can I make sure that I generate not a penalty, but actually a reward and potentially a profit from making the right choices?
Yes, so that is actually possible within the Fuel EU regulation. Here we don't look at compliance at a single ship level, but we look at compliance as a fleet. And the EU did not include whether this fleet needs to be of the same company, which basically means that if you as a company use alternative fuels and you have a compliance surplus, so you are over compliant with the regulation, then you can team up with a company who has a compliance deficit, so wouldn't be compliant on its own, and create a fleet. And you, as the over-compliant company, can sell the slots in your fleet to the company that is in need. And with that, you are not only compliant, but you also create additional revenue.
So, for example, if one of the smaller ship owners decides to convert their vessel to a methanol vessel or place a new order, by doing so, he will technically be able to bring on board many other non-compliant ships to, on average, comply. So here, actually, I think some of the costs of that transition can be recovered through all these other non-compliant companies buying that place in the compliance pool. And these are some nuances that actually can make one's business case better if they're looking at near-term investments and ROIs on some of these right now quite expensive projects. So that is a way to go about it.
As a shipping line, I may need some sort of technical support to dialogue with other stakeholders and intervene with my data so that I can avoid penalties and actually chase that kind of reward or profit. Is there any solution available to avoid the burden of all this back and forth with other people?
Yes, so you are absolutely correct. In fact, currently you would need to call everyone that you know in terms of potential collaboration partners for your fleet, and that would be a large burden regarding resources, time, and just the effort to find the right company to team up with. And that alludes to the requirement of having a technical marketplace. We refer to it almost as eBay, where you can set up the surplus and someone else can buy it if in need in terms of the regulation. And yes, there's a solution available. In fact, BetterSea just launched its FuelU marketplace where exactly that can happen. So shipping companies with a surplus can offer it on the marketplace, and shipping companies with a deficit can buy the pool slots in order to be compliant through the marketplace.
So to add on to that, the solution is there to help them actually even calculate what is at stake if they're not sure, and go beyond that to find the right pool to join, and then finally be able to trade compliance surpluses. So
if you like this conversation and you want to find out more about BetterSea, just check out the link below.